Freud was born on May 6, 1856, in Freiburg, Moravia, which is now in the Czech Republic. His parents, Jacob and Amelie, were 20 years apart in age. Freud's father had children from 2 previous marriages, some of which were older than his mother. As a child, Freud always felt as though one of his older brothers was extremely flirtatious with his mother. This led to a piqued interest in the dynamic of this relationship. When Sigmund Freud was 4 years old, his father's business collapsed and the family abruptly picked up and moved to Vienna. He was only able to recall fragments of this memory later on in life, such as lamps that resembled souls burning in hell, and glimpses of his mother in the nude. He never liked speaking about this period of his life. Freud was extremely traumatized by this move, and he was haunted by it for the rest of his life. After moving, his family became poverty-stricken. This event was a turning point for Freud, and influenced many of his future thoughts and ideas. He began to have an incredible amount of resentment towards his father. He felt as though his father was a coward, and wanted a father who was brave, bold, and assertive, as opposed to a father who was so submissive. Freud was incredibly favored by his mother, who constantly stroked his ego. He and his mother had a unique relationship, where he was placed above his siblings in importance. There is a story that says she even went so far as to force her daughter to quit piano lessons because the sound annoyed her son. He became extremely confident and arrogant because of this. Freud's infatuation with his mother, coupled with the resentment of his father, influenced many of his theories. Stories such as this one show how Freud's mother did anything and told him anything in order to make him believe that he was one of the most special children in the world. In 1886, Freud married Martha Bernays. After dating for a few years when they were younger, he broke things off because of his crippling fear of being too poor. He felt as though he should be much richer in order to have a wife. He wrote her love letters and courted her for 9 years while he built himself to a position where he felt his wealth was sustainable. Freud died in 1939 of mouth cancer due to years of constantly smoking cigars. In many of the recordings of right before his death, his voice is muffled because he still continued to work even though he was dying. His daughter and many protégés continued his work long after his death. Freud believed that a person's personality is almost entirely developed by the age of 5. He also stated that experiences in early life play an extremely important role in the development of later behaviors. Freud theorized that the mind is divided into 2 equally important parts: the conscious, which is everything that we are aware of, and the subconscious, our feelings, thoughts, urges, and memories that we're not always aware of. The subconscious is able to influence us even though we are completely unaware. Freud's most notable accomplishment was his theory of psychoanalysis. This is a theory of personalities and a form of psychotherapy. It involves self-analysis, which was the biggest contribution to psychology as we know it. Freud was known for frequently partaking in self-analysis. Freud frequently partook in self-analysis, and through this he discovered that as a boy he wanted to marry his mother, and he only resented his father because he was a rival for her love. He named this the Oedipus complex. Psychoanalysis states that nothing happens by chance. Freud stated that everything you think, feel, or fantasize about has some sort of unconscious motivator behind it. There are many points of view of the human personality: structural, genetic, dynamic, economic, interpersonal, and cultural. Without knowing all of these points of human personality, you will never be able to understand them. Freud stated that the psyche has three systems: the id, ego, and superego. These three systems work together and balance each other out in order to help the person self-regulate and make moral decisions. The id operates in the subconscious and is the unorganized part of the psyche's structure. Its main focus is on the sating of impulses and desires, regardless of how it happens, and it also pertains to the fulfilling of our most basic urges: food, water, and comfort. When a child is born, they only have the id present and are ruled by it until the other parts of the personality are able to develop. There are two parts that make up the superego: the conscience and the ego ideal. The conscience forbids behavior and includes what we feel will lead to negative consequences. The ego ideal is moral and ethical and involves the feelings that we get when we do something good. The superego develops standards of behavior and polices us on what is and isn't appropriate. It exists in both the subconscious and conscious realms and comes to us through feelings of guilt or pride. The superego is instilled in us through our parents. The ego arises from the id and is in control of voluntary motions and self-preservation. The purpose of the ego is to perform a balancing act between the impulsive nature of the id and following the strict standards imposed upon us by the superego. Unlike the id, it functions in both the conscious and subconscious levels of thinking. Freud hypothesized that there are 5 stages of human development: oral, anal, phallic, latent, and genital, also known as his psychosexual theory. The oral stage lasts from birth to 1 year old, or whenever the child is weaned from breastfeeding. The oral stage is the first stage of psychosexual development, where the mouth is the main source of pleasure. Feeding and teething are extremely important to this stage. The sexual pleasure that Freud stated comes from the oral stage, comes from the act of ingesting the food. A big part of the oral stage is the child being able to take in what is pleasant and spit out the things that are perceived to be unpleasant. According to Freud, the mother is the most important person to the baby's life at this point, and she has the sole parenting role. He feels as though the mother needs to be able to feed her child without making him or her anxious. This is because the infant's ego is forming during this point, and children who aren't properly attended to have a higher chance of becoming orally fixated and emotionally unstable later on in life. The anal stage lasts from the age of 1 to 3 years old. During this stage, the ego is still incredibly fragile and developing, and the erogenous zone moves from being the mouth to the anus. The main source of pleasure in the child at this age comes from being able to control bowel movements and urination. This, in turn, leads to toilet training, and a conflict arises between the id and the ego. The phallic stage occurs between the ages of 3 and 6 years old. During the phallic stage, the child's genitalia becomes the primary erogenous zone. This stage is characterized by the child having more awareness for their body and the bodies around them, which gives way to the learning of the difference between boys and girls. The phallic stage, which occurs between the ages of 3 and 6 years old, is the stage where the affection and infatuation with the parent of the opposite sex is said to begin. This also is accompanied by the feeling of rivalry with the parent of the same sex, because they are competing for the affection. The child doesn't realize that this is happening, and it allows for them to see the idea of possibilities and the limits associated with them. Towards the end of this stage, the child will pursue more mature and complicated relationships and move on from the wanting of a relationship with the parent of the opposite sex. The latent stage starts at the age of 6 and completes around the time where the child goes through puberty. During this stage, there is a calm before the storm effect in terms of the libido, as it is inverted before adolescence and comes before the explosion in hormones that children experience when they go through puberty. At this age, they begin to consolidate the habits that they formed during their earlier stages of life, and they will begin to develop hobbies, have school-age relationships, and have other interests. The genital stage is the longest lasting stage, as it occurs from the time a person goes through puberty until their death. During this stage, the person develops strong sexual interests and they want to form love and relationships. Their personality is now completely developed, and it is based upon the successes and failures of the previous stages. There's a detachment from the parents and a need to be independent and embark on their own responsible endeavors. Freud's theories were highly controversial and incurred much criticism. Some of the criticisms are the fact that there is little evidence to support these theories, and they don't lend themselves well to direct observation or testing. His theories have also largely been discounted as of recent times, and many people choose to resort to other theoretical orientations. Also, many people criticize his emphasis on the sexuality of children and believe that there are other, more complicated contributors to personality. This is a quote from Freud in response to the fact that during World War II, after he was pushed out of his country, Nazis were taking his books and burning them.